Hello and welcome to Latika Takes, a podcast with me, Latika Berg. Hello, welcome back to the podcast. A very short introduction today because it's absolutely not necessary. Today, I'm very, very pleased to bring you an interview I've been trying to secure for some time now. It's Ukraine's former Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba. Now, Dmytro Kuleba was Foreign Minister at the time of the full-scale invasion and stepped aside last year at the request of Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. The suggestion and speculation at the time was that Mr. Kuleba was doing rather too well in his job, and this was not good for a showman president. So Dmytro Kuleba is someone who not only brings a lot of knowledge and expertise and analysis to the current situation where Ukraine finds itself today, but he also is somebody to keep an eye on for the future, because when and if there is peace brought to Ukraine, the country will go to elections probably fairly soon. And there will be a few superstars in political and military life in Ukraine vying for that position. One of them is very likely to be General Zelensky, who we'll discuss in this interview. And the other is potentially Dmytro Kuleba. So I do take the opportunity to ask him about whether he holds any presidential ambitions. And pro tip, this was a question that just about everyone in Ukraine, when I told them I would be interviewing Mr. Kuleba, asked me to ask him. So job well done. Let's get into the interview. I began by asking Dmytro Kuleba if Ukraine can still win this war.
It may, but then also it depends on how you define the victory and how many resources you can allocate to achieve the goal.
So what would victory look like now?
Unfortunately, we do not have that discussion in the society. This is kind of everyone is. In fact, even mentioning the word victory has become inconvenient in public and private discussions, which I believe is a big mistake. Ukraine absolutely can win the war. But we have to have two things: clear definition of what victory is, and, as I said, resources allocated to achieve this goal. Today, I think the understanding of victory is the following. The war stops along the front line. Ukraine does not, neither Ukraine nor international community recognize the legality of the Russian presence in the occupied territories. Ukraine becomes a member of the European Union, begins the process of recovers from the war, and maintains and continues build up its military force with the support of partners as a guarantee against potential new invasion. For the time being, I think this would be the best way to frame it. I would describe it this way. It's a tactical loss, but strategic victory.
So I want to dig into that, but firstly, can I go back to what you said about victory not being a topic of discussion in Ukraine anymore? Why has that happened?
Exhaustion and newsfeed. It's very hard to keep talking about victory after 2 years of daily news about slow turtle speed, but still a retreat of Ukrainian forces from the villages and towns in the east of Ukraine. I mean, our army is heroic. If we compare the potentials and the strengths of our enemy and ours, it is a miracle and a heroism and efficiency of our army that we have managed to slow down Russian offenses in the east when it takes them more than a year to capture another town.
Like Provosk, yeah.
Like Pokrovsk, for example. Yeah. I was still the minister back in 2024, in August 2024, when my colleagues were saying that Pokrovsk will fall within 2 weeks. And it didn't happen for another year. So our army are heroes. This is out of question. But army does not have resources to change the tide of the war. And these resources can come from the rear in Ukraine, and from partners. And in Ukraine, we hit the ceiling of how much we can provide our army with, because we can produce more weapons, for example, but we simply don't have money to do that. Yeah, we pull our money on it. And Europe is way too slow in rearming and rebuilding its manufacturing capabilities when it comes to weapons. And the United States, you know where they stand. They basically withdrew. So, I mean, in terms of providing military support, they only sell certain types of weapons through NATO. So if this doesn't change, if things stay as I have just described them, in December 2026, where will we be? We will lose more territories, more people, our economy will be further devastated, but we will have more or less the same peace plan on the table. Peace terms. I mean, so this is the question now. How do we change? How do we solve problems? How do we learn lessons? Because Ukraine wants to change, of course, the trajectory of this war, but you cannot do it just by speaking and praying. You have to change things.
So I'm right in saying my sense when I've been in Ukraine is everyone wants ceasefire, yes?
Yes, but not on any terms.
Yes.
People, the general consensus is that we can accept a pause, which was not the case 2 years ago. The basic consensus and assumption 2 years ago that a pause in the war would serve Russia more than us. Now that has changed. But we are not any closer to the situation when Ukrainians would be ready to accept any kind of terms to put the ceasefire in place. And thirdly, most importantly, no one in Ukraine, I mean, I do not know a single person. I guess it exists somewhere, but I'm not aware of, I'm not familiar with the person who believes that ceasefire will be the end of the wars. Everyone sees it as a pause, and everyone understands that the war will come back.
So this was articulated very well on the weekend by Zelensky in an opinion piece he wrote for the UK media. And he largely set out that he thought any ceasefire would be a chance for Ukraine to regroup. And interestingly, and I wonder if you share his criticisms given you were there at the time, he seemed to be arguing that your initial effort for war was not funded properly, it was not directed properly. It seemed to me a bit of a criticism of the Zelensky government at the start of the war. What did you make of his piece and his assessment?
Listen, Ukraine and other European nations and the United States and many other nations scattered around the world, including Australia, they did a lot to help Ukraine. I would say they did much more than anyone could expect to be done. But history is ruthless. History does not judge you by what you did. History judges you by the outcome. And if you did a lot, but it didn't change, it did not alter the outcome, then it doesn't matter. Your effort was in vain. So this is, I believe, how everyone should feel now. It's not the point to find the guilty ones and crack down on them for what was not the win. If the war still rages on, if Ukraine is still retreating, it means none has done enough. Neither me, nor General Zelensky, nor President Zelensky, nor President Biden, or various European prime ministers. We can take credit for what we did, but then we have to bow our heads and apologize for not doing enough. We had won the war by now. Yes, that would have been an excellent opportunity to look back and analyze who did what and who was more efficient and who was less efficient. So in a nutshell, did all of us outperform ourselves? Yes. Was it enough to win the war? No. Which means that we have to sit down, look around, dive into our thoughts, and to come up with answers. What else do we have to do to win the war? Because this war isn't lost. As I said in the beginning, can win this war, but things have to change.
So it seems to me that another mistake maybe that your government, maybe even you have contributed to, you tell me, is that the Russians forged great relationships with the Trump administration. Where was Ukraine's equivalent action?
Yeah, that's a painful story to tell. So some domestic mistakes were made. I mean, mistakes here at home in the way the reach out to the Trumpist camp was conducted. But,
What were those mistakes?
well, we were not well coordinated internally on the issue of how do we reach out to Trump.
Did you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I did it and other people did it. Everyone did something, but it did not work out as a system, as a coordinated effort. I created a note on my iPhone in, I think, March 2024 called Trump's Circles. And I started talking to very different people about the people who happened to be around Trump. And by the way, it wasn't that easy back then. No one could predict clearly the name of his Secretary of State or National Security Advisor. And it was very difficult to identify who were the people shaping his mind on foreign policy issues. Nevertheless, yeah, I did some digging. Other people in Ukraine did their digging. We were reaching out, we were talking. But there was no systemic, reliable communication channels built. That's the fact. And secondly, to some extent, we were trapped because the political discourse in the United States was so overheated that it was extremely difficult, and the Biden administration was so sensitive and vulnerable to the dynamics in domestic politics. For us, after everything President Biden had done for Ukraine, not to take into account the pain that our efforts to contact Trump inflicted on President Biden and his people. That was not something we could afford.
So you actively stopped yourselves from forming these relationships?
No, we did not stop ourselves, but we could have done more to form them.
Okay.
Very cautious, respectful towards the Biden administration, and better coordinated domestically.
And was that your decision, or was that Andriy Yermak's decision? Was that President Zelensky's decision?
It was not a specific decision. It's just the way things are being done. Sometimes you don't take a decision. It's just the way things happen.
You said elsewhere, I think, that Yermak stopped you from forming some of these key relationships. Is that right, or was that a mistranslation?
Well, it wasn't a mistranslation. I met Jared Kushner in early 2024 at a private dinner in Europe. And we were introduced to each other, exchanged contacts. I came back to Kyiv and I briefed to the president that I can develop this contact and I believe it would be helpful long term. But Mr. Yermak was completely opposed to it, and for a very simple reason, because he wanted to be the sole communicator with the United States. So he basically said that Jared Kushner is no one, is no name. And we have to bet on other people. So
Jared Kushner is overnight in Moscow negotiating the terms of peace that may be imposed upon Ukraine. Are you serious?
That's called strategy. I always say that we still have to learn the art of strategy. You have to build relationships, and it takes time to build them. And if we had, even if not me personally, but someone else had started building a relationship with Jared, at least it would do no harm. But as we observe now, it would have been extremely beneficial for Ukraine if Jared had a better understanding and empathic attitude towards our country. This is one of those strategic mistakes that happen.
How do you feel about that? I mean, you're telling me very dispassionately, but this is your country's future that's being negotiated in Moscow, potentially terms being imposed on Ukraine that should never be imposed on Ukraine, all because of these things you could have had in your hands. I mean, this must be devastating for you.
Do you know an impeccable human being?
No, but I mean, there are decisions that are clearly made with good judgment, and then there are just terrible ones.
No, listen. Nations are like humans. They all make their mistakes. And if this was the only mistake that we made, I would have been happy. But we made many more mistakes. Some of them were made because of the lack of experience, others out of the lack of judgment. But Russia made its mistakes, the United States made their mistakes, Europeans made their mistakes, everyone made mistakes. I'm speaking dispassionately about it because I don't think we can afford being passionate. We have to be cold-minded, and you made the mistake, learn and never repeat it. That's it. But if you keep accumulating mistakes, you are doomed. You're going to lose it. And this is today the difference between us. Actually, the only big difference between Russia on the one side and Ukraine and the rest of Europe on the other side is, and I have to admit it, that Russia is learning its lessons better than we do.
That's interesting, because at the start of the war, it was the case that you were learning the lessons a lot faster and better.
Yes, exactly. But then we became overly passionate. We were euphoric. We began to believe that victory is within reach, that it's just another push and Russia is going to collapse. So instead of learning lessons, we began to believe in our perfection. And Russia learned its lessons, and this is where we are.
Do you think that the US has switched sides?
Depends on the criteria, let me say this. Do the United States base their peace proposals on Russian demands? Yes. Are they going to continue doing so? Yes. But for example, on the issue of Ukraine's membership in NATO, the only difference between Biden's and Trump's position is that Trump is vocal about it.
Yeah.
And you know it very well. But it's very tempting to conclude that Trump sold his soul to Putin. But I think that would be an oversimplification, because there is also another factor in the game, and it's this. The Americans, especially this administration, is trying to be very factual when it comes to the situation on the ground. So they look on the map and they see that this is where Russia is. This is where they will be in a week, in a month's time. And then they ask themselves a question. Do Ukrainians have resources to stop this advancement? No. Will Europe be able to provide them with these resources? No. Who is able of doing that? Us. Are we willing to do it? No. That's it. So, of course, if this is the way you analyze the situation, the only conclusion you can come to is to say Russia is there, we just have to recognize it, because there is no way we can throw them out of there. So the Americans are being very factual when it comes to the situation on the ground, and it helps them to find an excuse to the positions aligned to, in promoting the positions aligned with Russian positions. They just say it's a statement of fact. But the core problem is that they're not willing to change it. They have the capability, but they're not willing to change the circumstances.
Ukraine wants to join NATO, but do you think NATO is going to exist? Because it looks like the US is very half-hearted about NATO, not just your own admission, of course, but the US itself and its commitment to Europe. Is NATO even something that down the track Ukraine can join, because it might not even exist?
Okay, my take on the current situation is this. Trump is not going to withdraw from NATO. Not a single US soldier is going to die fighting for Europe under President Trump. It doesn't mean he will abandon Europe completely. There are many ways he can support Europe in the case of the war, but Americans are not going to fight. The second point is that Russia is going, in my view, Russia is on the course of waging a war against NATO ally in Europe. And the first 24 hours of that invasion will give an answer to your question whether NATO is going to survive. Because what Putin is looking for are not territorial gains. He needs 24 hours of hesitation and inaction in Brussels.
Yes. And interestingly, they just put out a readout with the Chinese saying that they both endorsed the new security architecture that Putin envisions for Europe, which of course is a Europe without NATO, right?
Yeah, that's a story with a very long tail, the Russian security architecture for Europe. But NATO has to prove itself. NATO is proudly and fairly arguing that it is the most successful defense alliance in human history because no one ever dared to attack it. That's a fair point. But now you have to prove the same point after being attacked.
Can you see a world where this conflict is not then contained to Ukraine and maybe a country in Eastern Europe, but there is broader conflict on the European continent? Do you see that that is now a prospect that maybe we didn't think 5 years ago?
Oh, very visibly. I will say it again. If things do not change in Europe and in the way Europe and America support Ukraine, Putin is going to wage a war against a NATO ally in Europe within years. We're not talking about decades.
So what does that mean?
That means in the old good times, it was called continental war. People make a mistake when they imagine the war as thousands of soldiers marching into their territory, and they see invasion in physical terms. But the invasion will begin in a differently. People will wake up in country X in the morning, and they will read the news that overnight when they were sleeping, 5 unidentified drones hit, I don't know, a military warehouse, ports, an electricity facility.
I mean, we are already inching towards that. We have seen drones go around airports in several European countries now. It's a matter of time until they're armed, right?
I'm arguing there will be a war in Europe not because I'm a magician who sees things unfolding based on the secret knowledge. I'm drawing that conclusion on the dynamics of the situation in Russia, in Ukraine, in Europe, and in the United States. And you already see these things happening. These are not isolated incidents. This is all part of testing waters and preparing for the invasion. And we know there will be a war, but it will not be a nuclear war because no one is going to respond with nuclear strikes on Kremlin in response to Russian conventional invasion of Europe. It will be a test for Europe, for the West, and we'll see how it plays out. But as one intellectual, very intelligent guy recently said, Ukrainian intellectual recently said, all civilized empires fell under the strikes of barbarians.
When I was in Ukraine and I was visiting munitions factories and drone makers, one of the things I found really interesting was how many Ukrainians would say to me unprompted, we have only 1% Chinese components, or we have no Chinese components. And from this, I took a real societal understanding in Ukraine that China was also an enemy, or at the very least, China was helping kill Ukrainians. What was your relationship with China when you were the foreign minister? And what do you think the future relationship with China will be for Ukraine?
There are 2 layers inherent with China. The first layer is where you can be very outspoken about the way China is helping Russia. Mm-hmm. But on the second level, you have to be patientless, as you said, and realize 2 things. You cannot end this war without China's help. Mm-hmm. Xi Jinping is the only person in the world who can pick up the phone and say, Vladimir, it's time to stop.
Wait, you don't think Trump is the man that could do that?
No. Trump has to negotiate. Trump has to make concessions. Trump has to put pressure. Given the scale and depth of Russia's dependence on China, Xi holds the leverage. And it's very good that President Trump finally started talking with Xi about Ukraine. Mm-hmm. We are far away from turning these conversations into practicalities, but at least they
okay, so but why doesn't China do this?
Because they're fine with what's going on. Why they do not? China's position is this. China, in my view, China doesn't want neither Ukraine nor Russia to win this war. Mm. Russia's victory makes Moscow stronger, victorious, bolder. That's not the Russia that China is willing to see. They are interested in Russia that is begging them for help. Mm. That's falling into deeper dependencies. And that won't be the case anymore if they prevail in Ukraine. And of course, they do not want Russia to lose because they still need Russia. And most specifically, they need Putin's Russia. Mm-hmm. They understand the man. he entered into agreements with them. He bears personal responsibility for delivering on these commitments and obligations he undertook. So China is, I think, satisfied with the current course of events because that's exactly what meets their interests.
Ukraine is very dependent on China too. I mean, all of us are. Is this something that you think Ukraine in the future is going to have to diversify from, or do you think it's just a reality that we're all now dependent on China?
How can you diversify yourself from a superpower? It's very, very difficult to do. There will be, our agriculture will always be tempted to enjoy better relation, to enjoy bigger access to the Chinese market. And this will be the biggest leverage. So the second layer I was speaking about is actually the one where you understand that China is helping Russia and you understand what kind of interests they pursue. But first, she has leverage on Putin and you cannot come at odds with someone like that. And secondly, China is currently it's the second superpower and eventually it will become the first superpower in the world. So you have to think, and they never forget. They have very good memory. So you have to think of where your relationship with China will be in 50 years. You have to think strategically. And the first layer kind of puts pressure on the second layer.
It has been a very turbulent time inside Ukraine these last few weeks and months with the corruption scandal, with Yermak's resignation, who we talked about earlier. Has this weakened Zelensky internally and or abroad? And does that then weaken Ukraine internally and or abroad?
I don't think so. Everyone wanted Zelensky to fire Yermak. So when he did it, I think he actually got stronger, not weaker. I don't think he did it abruptly, like out of the blue. It's clearly a conscious decision, and he's prepared to govern the country differently in terms of instruments and ways of governance. But the biggest change that the president has to undergo now is meaningful transformation. How do we change the way we govern in substance, not only in form? And everyone, in my view, today, everyone should extend a supportive hand to the president, because this transformation is the only way for Ukraine to get stronger and to begin to learn its lessons and to improve. And if he undergoes that transformation successfully, we should support him. Of course, if he doesn't, that opens up. People will be very, very unhappy about that. But we are today in this very transformative moment when we just have to sit straight and see where the president is going to take it to from here.
Can you survive without US support? Is the intelligence and the weapons that they provide you? Say Trump gets very irritated with the blockage in not being able to sort this peace deal out, and the US walks away in a meaningful sense and stops intelligence or something like this. Is that the end of Ukraine?
We will survive, but things are going to get much, much, much more worse than they are. For example, when Russian strategic bombers take off to attack Ukrainian cities with missiles, we learn about it from US intelligence. So if we do not learn about it in advance, we will not be ready to declare, we will not be able to announce air alert. Our cities will be exposed to attacks, to more attacks. So, and the same applies to our deep strikes, and the same applies to the situation on the front line. So intelligence is the first critical thing, and the second one is interceptors for Patriot air defense systems, because PAC-2 they're called.
Yep.
PAC-2 are the only the only missiles that can intercept the Russian ballistic missiles. So if they're not supplied to Ukraine, basically our sky will be open to the Russians will dominate the sky, and it will be extremely difficult to throw them out. This is why I think it would be against genuine interest of the Trump administration to suspend these two ways of supporting Ukraine, because then the blame for enormous civilian casualties and destruction of the country would be squarely put on President Trump.
Who does genuinely seem to really be quite moved and upset by killing. He seems to really personally, viscerally dislike how many people have to die.
I think he actually does want this war to end.
Yeah.
He doesn't care about the terms of ending this.
Yes.
But we do.
But the terms matter because it deters, right, a future invasion. That's the whole point.
Yeah, exactly. So, and Putin cares as well. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that President Trump is sincere when he complains about the number of deaths. So I don't think this is the responsibility he wants to weigh on his shoulders. So I think that it's going to stay. And the third thing that is going to stay is this mechanism of selling U.S. weapons through NATO to EU members of NATO, who then transfer these weapons to Ukraine. But these three elements put together go in no comparison to the scale of military assistance that Ukraine enjoyed during the Biden administration.
So this brings me perfectly to my next question. So Australia and New Zealand have just announced they're becoming the first non-NATO countries to join Pearl, it's a good thing, right? But the figure is $50 million Australian from Australia. I mean, this is pittance, particularly compared to the amount we've made from refined oil. And I wonder if you feel like this fatigue is dried up for you now, that even the countries that are your best friends have nothing more, or maybe not the will to give you much more.
I don't think it's about fatigue. I think it's about ticking the box. So like a politician, what is on the books, calls in his secretary or members of government, associates, and says, what is on the agenda? This is support of Ukraine. What can we do? Well, we can join Pearl. And what is the minimum amount of money? Let's do something like 50 million. Great. Tick the box. We will continue helping you. Then the statement comes out. We remain committed. We will continue to help you.
No, it's stand by Ukraine for as long as it takes. Never with what it will take, for as long as it takes.
Yes. And I have a and of course this effort also has to be appreciated.
Yeah.
I mean, we aren't ungrateful people.
Yes.
But I think when the fourth year of the war is coming to an end, we have to seriously kind of ask ourselves a question. Are we ticking the boxes, or are we really willing to win?
Exactly.
And because, again, if Russia wins in Ukraine, everyone, including in Australia, are going to feel the shockwaves sent across the globe. Because the message be very simple. Invading another nation pays out. It's difficult. It's painful. You also pay a price. But in the end, you get what you want. If this is how Australia sees its part of the world within the next decade, that 50 million is exactly enough to tick the box. But to take the situation to the point when you will have to be spending 50 billions to defend yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Trump likes to say Biden, under him, this war would never have happened. Whether or not that's true is hypothetical, right? But what we certainly do know is that under Biden, he didn't let you win the war either. Why do you think that was?
Because winning the war in Ukraine, against Russia has never been in the U.S. playbook on foreign policy.
Why?
Because fighting a war against Russia was something that the United States were never willing to do since the split up of the Soviet Union. Russian presidents, so in 1992, decision in the West was made that the border of the West in Europe will be the eastern border of Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, which effectively meant that Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova, they were designated the status of the part of the Russian world friendly to the West. And the reason why the West wanted these countries to remain friendly is because these countries were actually directly bordering the Western countries. And everything you had seen between 1992 and 2022, exactly, 30 years, was the implementation of that policy. Ukraine is a part of the Russian world, but we do exactly enough to keep them friendly to us, but we never move a finger to take them, to help them jump out of the Russian world. And what the West completely missed is the rise of Ukrainian nation.
Mm-hmm. This is what Maidan and all the revolutions were about, right?
The rise of the nation that clearly said, this is not where we belong. We belong with Europe. This is where our roots are. Our princesses were married to French, English, and Danish princes. We read the same books. We all spoke Latin language. I mean, at the level of elites, of course.
Yeah.
This is where we belong. We're coming back. But the West had neither courage, nor strategic vision, nor willingness to embrace this moment. And it all came together in 2014.
Yes.
And we lost Crimea and part of Donbass because President Obama was guided by the policy of Ukraine is a part of the Russian world. And therefore, you do not go to war with Russia over Ukraine. That's kind of the bottom line of American foreign policy. You do not go to war with Russia over Ukraine.
But you were at war. And my point is not about sending US forces. It's about equipping Ukraine to have actually defeated Russia or at least held them off when you could have.
Exactly. But the fact that President Obama never sent any piece of weaponry to Ukraine comes from the fundamental approach to this. That we should not escalate because we are not going to fight. Not in the terms of sending troops, but in terms of fully engaging into the struggle.
Okay, so if we fast forward this logic and that basis, what are the security guarantees that actually work for Ukraine, that one, you believe will be upheld because every other promise has been broken, and two, will deter Putin?
Sustainable and scalable military assistance to Ukraine.
Do you want troops? Do you want the coalition of the willing?
There will be no combat troops in Ukraine. No one is going to fight for us.
So
I rule it out. I rule it out as an option. I do not see, perhaps I'm overly skeptical, but I do not see a situation where US, French, British, German troops fight for Ukraine against Russia in Ukraine.
Not US, but the coalition of the willing is a European-led.
I mentioned them as well. Brits, French, Germans, Dutch, no, Poles, no. They will be eagerly calling us in when they have to fight for their lands. That is definitely going to happen.
Ouch. That's hard to hear.
But that's a reality, and we have, I always urge to realistically assess the situation because it is the only way you can draw right conclusions and make right decisions to change that reality. So, military assistance to Ukrainian army, I do not believe in other nations fighting for Ukraine. Secondly, sustainable macro-financial assistance to Ukraine. Because we simply don't have money to fight a war of this scale and longevity. And thirdly, EU membership for Ukraine. Because in the end, what is it all for? It is to win the right for Ukraine to be a normal European nation. So these three things put together, they constitute a security guarantee, at least for me.
Just finally, everyone I've asked in my Ukrainian network when I said I was going to be interviewing you, when I said, what would you ask him? They said, ask him if he's going to be president. Are you going to run for president? I mean, you speak with such clarity. It's very obvious you were sacked because you're probably too good at your job. Are you going to run?
Well, I have no plans for.
Oh, that means yes. When politicians say no plans, that means yes.
Okay, you got me. But seriously, today I'm like as distant from politics as possible.
What are you doing?
I have recently started my YouTube channel.
Ah.
Doing it with my wife. I'm writing a book. I'm teaching at the university in Paris. I mean, I live in Kyiv, but I was traveling back and forth for my classes. I am consulting some defense companies, international defense companies, those who are interested in understanding the dynamics of the world for their businesses. And I am also working on and I commissioned a plan of renovation of our house village where my mother was born and where I spent some beautiful summers as a child. So I'm staying away from politics, but I am who I am, and I do not know how, what life holds for me. So I don't feel running now, really. But I never shied away from helping the country that I love and dedicated my life to.
You have so much to offer, though. I mean, your clarity, your knowledge, your relationships, even in the course of this interview, it's so clear you have so much to still give.
Well, that's very kind of you, but today I have far smaller ambitions. I need to fix the problem of my dogs fighting each other.
What kind of dogs do you have?
I have a French bulldog. He's an evacuee from Mariupol in 2022. We adopted him. And then we also have a stray dog whom we took from shelter. He actually also comes from Donbass, from the war zone, but we adopted him from shelter. And our French bulldog, when the second dog came to the house, he was happy. The next morning he realized that the other dog is not leaving. This is where problems began.
This sounds like my cat when I brought my second cat home. Did not end well for me or for the other cat.
Now a 10-kilogram French bulldog is sparing no effort to expel and scare away a 20-kilogram stray dog out of our house. We're trying to teach them how to love. These are the problems that I'm genuinely preoccupied with now, and not political prospects of elections.
It's another sort of peace you're trying to broker, I can see. Dmytro Kuleba, thank you so much for your time. We'd booked only half an hour, but we've gone on so long, so I'm very grateful, and I hope I haven't kept you from anything too much, but it was such a good conversation. I really appreciate your time, and good luck to Ukraine.
Thank you, Latika. It was a pleasure seeing you again, and thank you for the support.
You've been listening to Latika Takes with me, Latika Burke. You can find my work at latikambirk.com and this podcast where you find all your podcasts. See you next time.